Yo, what up? This is D Knight, and you're listening to the Pardon the Interaction podcast. My oh my, we've had so much going on. For starters, in case you missed it, we've got a new addition to the Pardon Pie family, Tara Dublin. Make sure you go follow her on Twitter at Tara Dublin Rocks. Also, pick up a copy of her book while you're at it. Make her day, The Sound of Settling. A very fun and interesting read compared to the things we talk about on this podcast. But yeah, we're heading toward the do or die time for the 2024 election. Go ahead and hit up JoeBiden.com. Get that man like $1 a month or something. Help his campaign staff up and get prepared to try and save our democracy. And make sure to grab like one other person you know and tell them about the podcast. Make sure they subscribe and tune in every single week. We got a lot of things coming up for you this year. We need all the support that we can get. So if you do your part and help us grow our audience, we'll do our part and help elect Joe Biden in 2024 and save American democracy. And this is the Pardon the Interaction podcast. Yo, what up? This your boy D Knight, and you're listening to the Pardon the Interaction podcast. The girls got the day off, got a lot going on, some family shit, some life shit, you know, all that kind of good shit. Giving them a break. But before we get started, let's give a shout out to our sponsor, Sheets and Giggles. Colin, the CEO, he the man. He sent me some dope ass sheets. I sleep incredibly well at night, unlike Donald Trump, because he's headed to prison, and very much unlike one soon-to-be former president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. He's got his hands full. I'm sure he won't be sleeping well tonight either. But you can if you pick up a nice, comfortable, wonderful set of sheets from Sheets and Giggles. That's sheetsandgiggles.com. Check it out. Support your boy. Make me look good. You know, don't make Colin regret getting in bed to me like whoever that was that got in bed with Marjorie Taylor Greene and knocked her up, so she had to get an abortion and then divorce her husband. Fantastic times. All right, kids. Clearly, we've had a lot going on this week, for sure. We've had the whole Ocean Gate debacle that was supposedly a distraction from President Biden having his son plead guilty to a couple of misdemeanor crimes, like failing to register his lawnmower or, I don't know, driving his bicycle while intoxicated, whatever the fuck he was up to. I don't know. Yeah, so that was a whole debacle. That was a thing. Also, we had a number of breaking developments in the 1-6 investigation as it pertains to Special Counsel Jack Smith. A couple of things going on there for sure. He's got apparently granted immunity to a number of individuals associated with the fake elector plot in that scheme to overturn the 2020 election. Also, apparently, Donald Trump's people think Mark Meadows is a rat. So that's some fun shit we'll get into next week when the girls come back. Unless there's, of course, more breaking developments in that department. There was also that Washington Post article about the holdovers from Trump's FBI clashing with Department of Justice officials in pursuing the upper echelon as it pertains to the individuals who planned the 1-6 insurrection and the plot to overturn the 2020 election. That was quite a doozy. Hopefully we'll get a chance to tackle that when I get the kids back on the pod. And of course, there's probably the one thing that everyone in the world wants to talk about right now. Apparently, there's an ongoing attempt by Wagner mercenaries and their leader, Putin's chef, also known as Evgeny Prigozhin, is attempting to seize power in Russia. Your classic military coup, even though I guess Wagner's not necessarily part of the Russian military as much as it is private military contractors, Blackwater types, except the Russian version. So, twice as untrustworthy while being half as effective. That's what you get when you sign up for these guys. If you're not overly familiar with Prigozhin, given that we don't talk about him much on this podcast, given that this podcast is more about the 2020 insurrection than it is about the Russian interference in the 2016 election, although the two are interrelated to some degree. So not only is he the head of a private military contractor group, he's also the head of a catering firm well known for its rise to acclaim by procuring a number of government contracts thanks to Vladimir Putin himself. Also, if you engage on the social media, the Twitter specifically, you might be aware of the Russian disinformation campaign involving the Internet Research Agency and their use of multiple thousands of internet trolls and inauthentic accounts and, millions of bot swarms and the like to spread misinformation and create havoc and mischief in American politics. And the individual most responsible for that endeavor would be, you guessed it, Evgeny Prigozhin. So he's a wonderful character. He was actually charged by special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into the 2016 Russian interference in our election here for his role in that activity. And he had actually made an admission to the fact that not only he but the Russian government were interfering in our elections. We have him on the record here with, quote, "We have interfered in U.S. elections. We are interfering, and we will continue to interfere. Carefully, accurately, surgically, and in our own way, as we know how to do. During our pinpoint operations, we will remove both kidneys and the liver at once." Yeah, so as you can see, he seems like a very charming fellow. He also spent a number of years in prison during the 1990s for crimes such as robbery and whatnot. By all accounts, a member of the Bratva, what we would consider the mob here. Apparently, after getting out of prison, he got into some business ventures and made out very well for himself and ended up in very close proximity to Vladimir Putin over the last couple of decades here. So, after Putin's poorly planned and even more poorly executed invasion of Ukraine and the response by the United States as well as our allies to come to their defense as far as sending aid, weapons, ammunition, and money and such, Ukraine has managed to stave off what seemed like an inevitable defeat for over a year now, and it appears that the tables have turned as far as Russia's army is concerned. Prigozhin seems to have lost his patience with the endeavor, instead turning his sights on Russia's government itself, abandoning its pursuit of forcing Ukraine to surrender. I would imagine he's not doing this on his own entirely. Obviously, for him to be able to pull off such a feat would require the support of a number of high-ranking Russian military officials, as well as officers in Russian intelligence, and more than likely than not, support from a number of wealthy oligarchs who have generally been in support of Putin, at least up until this point. There's no way he could pull this off by himself or would even pull the trigger on this by himself unless he had some assurances from a number of people that they would pledge their support to him should he come away victorious in a coup against Vladimir Putin. It's also absolutely fucking ironic that while Trump was in office, Putin was getting everything he wanted. There was no need for him to resort to a military invasion of Ukraine. Once Biden took Trump out of the White House, Putin decided to take measures into his own hands, apparently, and launch a full-scale invasion that did not work out in his favor. What seemed like a certain victory for Putin in short order initially became a long, protracted battle, costing numerous Russian lives and a staggering loss of Russia's military capabilities. Given that things have gone so poorly, I had previously hypothesized that one of the ways that Putin was staving off the inevitable coup was the hopes that Trump could be reelected in 2024, and having his stooge back in the White House would probably solidify his power base back at home in Moscow and over Russia. But given that Trump was recently indicted here in the Southern District of Florida for numerous counts of Espionage Act violations as well as obstruction, the possibility that Trump could end up in the White House in 2024, that scenario is seeming less and less likely, which obviously did not bode very well for Putin. It's a shame. Thoughts and prayers. Apparently now Russia has the second most powerful army in Russia. So things aren't looking too great for his prospects. Also, given the nature of the way he has run his regime, a criminal authoritarian who does not maintain power through democratic means, but by force and by cheating and by rigging elections and amassing power and stealing wealth, who's committed a number of war crimes abroad and a number of crimes at home. His plan obviously included being president for life. Otherwise, losing office for him would be a death sentence given the circumstances. So this is not just a battle for power between Putin and Prigozhin and whatever proxies Prigozhin is fighting on behalf of, but it's also a battle for Putin's life. Putin's also announced charges of treason against Prigozhin. Of course, that supposedly comes with a hefty prison sentence, but I do believe we all know that in this case, what that means is execution in one way or another for Prigozhin, should he fail to pull this off and be caught and imprisoned. Don't necessarily know if that would involve being executed live on TV or perhaps poisoned slowly over the course of time, like a number of Putin's political adversaries. I'm not rooting for either of these individuals to be victorious. They're both fucking terrible people, evil human beings. I'm sure Prigozhin is just as brutal and dastardly as Putin himself. Again, we've been reminded here in this particular instance, the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. For sure. I do believe that given the circumstances, the most ideal scenario, or at least as it pertains to America, is for Prigozhin to be victorious, to oust Putin, but for Putin to flee, but remain free, while continuing to try to regain support from the elites and the criminal organizations and the oligarchs that run Russia, while creating enough infighting and strife internally within Russia so they're so preoccupied with themselves that they're no longer a threat to Ukraine that they will withdraw their forces. The war will end. Ukraine can start rebuilding their infrastructure. And the more time Russia spends preoccupied with its internal strife and divisions, the less time they'll have to spend interfering in the 2024 United States presidential election. And if that happens to be the case, it will be an all-around victory for democracies all across the world. Totalitarian regimes imploding like poorly crafted submersible vehicles attempting to witness the Titanics at the bottom of the ocean. You hate to fucking see it. You haven't seen anything blow up this fast since Elon's fucking rocket. It's quite the fucking accomplishment, I'll have to say. Alright, well, I assume we'll have more information and insight on that on next week's episode of the podcast, so stay tuned for that. Should be delightful. Alright, let's get to the Twitter. Get around to answering a number of questions from the Ask My Black Ass Anything. From MJB. That is at MJB0007. Will the GOP abandon Putin? Quote, I didn't really know him. He was just a coffee boy. Will this diminish Trump's power/cult? Well, that's a wonderful question. I have no fucking idea, given the fact that I have no idea what it is that Putin may be holding over Republicans, or at least the ones holding office currently. Of course, they struck a deal with the devil/Putin in 2016, in exchange for his support in helping them win their elections. They've clearly made some kind of pledge of fucking loyalty, like when Trump asked FBI Director Comey for an oath of loyalty after Trump took office. Some weird shit. Like, it's entirely possible that there's enough, compromising information available to Putin and his cronies to keep them in line, even though he is potentially on his way out of office. Now, it's also possible that given his seemingly diminishing control of the regime, that it's entirely possible that Republicans could use this as an opportunity to cut bait. Right, the Titanic is clearly sinking. Trump's failing. Putin's failing. Maybe this is the time for them to attempt to regain control of their party and move things in a different direction. Likely not in time for 2024, but possibly 2028. Regroup, rebuild, reorganize, new strategy, new direction, cleanse the party of all the fucking Putin loyalists. I mean, if that's even possible at this point. I mean, again, I have no idea how compromised the fucking party is. Who knows? Who fucking knows? Alright, that Packer girl asks, so, will Putin have a Mussolini ending by the end of the week? I'm giving him by the end of the month, in all likelihood. Putin has a reputation for being a strong man, but that is more projection than anything. Oftentimes, Putin is a shrewd individual, not willing to, he's prudent when it comes to taking measures that might involve him losing his life. He is more prone to self-preservation than anything, and that strong man shit is just a front that serves him in that endeavor. But in this particular case, should things look very, very harrowing, I'm sure that he will do his best to escape the situation and flee to safety and regroup the same way that Republicans should be doing right now in 2028. But as for Putin, he has a number of enemies within Russia as well as without, and there's probably nowhere that he can go that can truly guarantee his safety. And if the entirety of the Russian military, criminal, spy, industrial complex decides that they want Putin permanently removed from the chessboard, they will make that happen. So give him a fucking month. Arlo asks, that is at Arlo, how are you doing today? Hope all is well. Well, I'm fucking fantastic. How often do we ever get news as good as this? I mean, this shit is just amazing. Russia's imploding. Our biggest geopolitical enemy over the last 60 years, apart from possibly China, it's about to be taken off the chessboard, so it's pleasant news. Liz Jones, that is at LizArt11, asks, when do we get the compromise dump? Well, again, I don't know. That depends. Like, does Putin want to go out in a blaze of glory and take everyone down with him? I mean, if that's the case, then we'll be getting it soon. If he sees the potential to, use whatever compromising information he has on his allies and enemies across the world to blackmail them, to, at the very least, provide him continued protection, even if he is removed from power, then we might never see it. Just depends. Alright, Jetson. That is at Jetson77. Why aren't Republicans calling the Moscow mutiny a peaceful fucking protest? Because it's a fucking coup. That shit works when there's not tanks running through the streets in America. You can kind of try and massage the truth away with your supporters, well, their supporters here in America, when it's like, Stuart Rose, who shot himself in the fucking face, and a bunch of other morons storming the Capitol. You try that shit here. You cannot try that with this. This is literally a military coup. Harvest 68, well, that's at Harvest 451. That's my girl. What's up, yo? How you doing? She asked, do you think the Wagner group will succeed? Alone, no. But if they garner support from other Russian military officials, those with direct control over commanding officers who have loyal infantrymen and battalions waiting to come to Wagner's aid should they require it, or at the very least to stay out of Wagner's way, then yeah, it's entirely fucking possible. Dude can pull this shit off. Now, again, this might not necessarily be the best thing for the Russians, because I'm not entirely certain that Prigozhin is any improvement over Putin in terms of, acting on behalf of the public interest. But as far as the world is concerned, let them motherfuckers fight it out, I suppose. All right, Juan M. Hernandez, that is at Presidio56, asks, who is preparing Putin's meals these days? Well, Putin's probably showing up at random fucking McDonald's, ordering his shit ahead of time, because I'm sure he's worried about something untoward ending up in his food or his beverages, given the way that Russia operates. All right, Lisa G. That is at Lisa G Votes Blue. What's your favorite color? My favorite color is Russians killing each other, whatever fucking color that is. All right, Nonstop Resistor. That is at NOSODOEO. Can't think of a good question. What do you wish someone would ask? Shit, I don't know either. That's your job. That's why I asked you to ask the fucking questions. I'm just here to give the answers. You're supposed to be playing this game better than this, guys. Come on. Chloe, that is at Izzard777. How long before Trump says the Russia versus Russia battle would not be taking place if he was still president? And then says he could solve the crisis in 24 hours or less. Well, you know his routine. You have it down at this point. Clearly that's coming soon. I put the over-under at 24 hours. Miss Fed Up, that is at Lulu Bobcat 1, says, this situation is giving me Muammar Gaddafi vibes. What say you? Well, I would entirely agree with you, except for the particulars of how Gaddafi ended up meeting his end. I'm fairly certain the CIA isn't involved in instigating this thing. Like, this was just inevitably bound to happen once Putin's, quote, special military operation went so fucking poorly in Ukraine. The entire country was sanctioned. Countries around the world, Europe in particular, started giving these fucking oligarchs the boot and seizing their shit and supporting Ukraine. Like Putin putting Russia in this position, like he did it to him fucking self. All right, Kai G, that is at, I don't know how to pronounce your fucking name, is at VOGELGIEBHEABR, asks, are there any windows at Putin's dacha? Well, I am inclined to say that they are likely very strongly reinforced windows, because he's well aware of how a number of Russia's prominent, wealthy, and powerful meet their end, and not just aware, likely responsible. He doesn't want to meet the same fucking fate. All right. At _Arthur_Dent_ says, Dark Brandon this week. And then the gif of Tony Stark as the mountains are exploding behind him from the detonation of the Stark Tech missiles. Abso-fucking-lutely. Miss Kitty Von Trap House, that is at Kitty_Von, asks, does Ukraine still get admitted to NATO if the conflict leaves that country? They're still vulnerable, and that's my concern. I'm going to go with 90% chance of no there. And not that Ukraine is not worthy, but again, like, think of the giant bureaucracy and all the hubbub and hassle that it took just to get to this point where, even though it's been in NATO's best interest to support Ukraine, it took all of this hassle on the part of Biden just to get to the degree of support that they have now. I mean, maybe over the course of another decade or so, it's entirely possible that Ukraine could meet the conditions that would satisfy the requirements to enter NATO. I'm not entirely sure, but there are a number of experts out there that you can go to on the Twitterverse that will explain to you specifically why they don't believe it's the case, and I would have to agree with them. Not that they don't deserve it, just the world is unfair that way, right? They've done a huge service to NATO and the United States and our allies in general, and not necessarily fighting a proxy war against Russia, but Russia invited this upon themselves, and they managed to weaken what appeared to be at the time the second most powerful army in the world. That army seems to be mostly devastated, inoperable at this point, unable to wage any sort of large-scale military activity. I mean, that's a huge win, and Ukraine should be rewarded for that, but they won't. I'm sorry. It's just, I mean, I'm sure they'll get a lot of help as far as rebuilding the country, the infrastructure, and the economy and whatnot, but being welcomed into the arms of the NATO alliance itself, probably not. It's unfortunate. Side tangent, President Biden spent approximately 5% of the yearly U.S. military budget supporting Ukraine, and this is what he fucking got. The man, a fucking genius. Fucking genius. The absurdist, that is at Donald Trump is a 5, asks, will Crimea declare independence? Well, bro, Crimea is a part of Ukraine, and Crimea will declare fucking independence from Russia, if anything. Or at least that's what I'm guessing that you're asking. Definitely won't be asking for, declaring independence from Ukraine. No. Ray, that is at Ray, M-I-E-A, asks, what's your take on the GOP Putin boosters being largely silent on the events unfolding in Russia? Well, Ray, what the fuck are they supposed to say? They went all in, they put all their fucking chips on the table on the idea that Putin would be victorious in Ukraine and continue supporting them in subsequent elections here in the United States. And that appears to have potentially backfired, and not only backfired, in a massive unscheduled disassembly type fashion. Like, there's no public angle for them to take, and if there were one, they would have done so already. Hence the silence. There's nothing for them to say. They fucked up. They know they fucked up. Like, they're probably struggling just to figure out how they're going to come out of this alive. I'm sure there's going to be political consequences for them at home as well. It's a tough spot to be in. I do not envy them. Probably should have just stayed on the side of democracy and maintain their loyalties to America. I don't know what the fuck they're supposed to do at this point. Kelly Philbrandt asks, can we hope for any particular outcome here aside from the inevitable boost to Ukraine? Well, you can definitely hope for the inevitable withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine should Prigozhin take power. I assume that he will want to end that debacle as quickly as possible. Move to have Russia's government act in such a way that it encourages the United States and our allies to remove the sanctions against Russia, its businessmen, their companies and whatnot, in an attempt to get their economy back up and running. Because at this point, while it's not been totally devastating for the wealthy, this endeavor has been, well, it's not been going well for the average Russian citizen here. And I would imagine that in order to prevent a public uprising, Prigozhin will do everything in his power to return Russia to some sense of stability in such a way that he can maintain control, because if he does not, this thing could quickly spiral out of hand from a military coup to an outright public uprising that could end his regime as well should he become victorious. Jonathan Student, that is at JD Spur2, says, I love following you. Thanks, homie. I appreciate that. You got the Mets logo on your Twitter profile, but it's all rainbow, pride style. Happy Pride, homie. Tree Planter, that is at E Dorko, asks, how will Putin fans in the GOP, they're not going to spin this. There is no way to spin this. I mean, the only possible out they have is blaming Biden for the fall of Putin's regime. And then if you think about it, like, that's giving him credit. There'll be no way they can spin that as a fucking bad thing. And it was just making Biden look good. So they really don't have any fucking options. Rune D, that is at Rune Duvall, asks, will the GOP still get paid in rubles if Wagner is successful? They're probably going to get paid in fucking free Twitter Blue subscriptions, I guess. Herman, that is at Mark Irish Fan, asks, what happens to Navalny now? Well, if Navalny is in any condition to leave prison should Prigozhin take power and forge some kind of power sharing agreement with Prigozhin and his allies in an attempt to keep Russia stable so that public outrage doesn't end with Prigozhin meeting the same fate as Putin. I imagine Prigozhin is intelligent and astute enough to understand that might be in his best interest, but again, that also requires Navalny to acquiesce to such a power sharing arrangement, and Navalny might very well call for an uprising of his own in an attempt to steer Russia towards at least a somewhat more democratized state. But in all honesty, who the fuck knows? I didn't game plan this out, man. This is just some complicated shit that I didn't know was going to happen overnight, where I'd have spent more time. I mean, I've thought about this before, honestly, when Russia first invaded Ukraine and it didn't go well. I mean, you know, anyone could foresee that this was a possibility, but it seemed as though Putin had things relatively stable considering the performance of his armed forces in Ukraine, but apparently, I mean, there was some galvanizing factor that led to this, and I'm assuming, again, that was Trump's indictment. But yeah, anyway, I mean, if we hadn't been so fucking busy here cleaning up after our own coup, like, I would have given this more thought, I suppose, as far as Navalny's potential role as to what would happen post the military coup in Russia. All right, Elf Improvement, that is at Elf_adhesive, asks, will Tulsi and Tucker continue to be on the Russian payroll after Putin? And more importantly, is there a Lifetime movie in their story? Like, they lose their high-paying propaganda jobs and had to move back home and open a cupcake shop together. Yo, that's some real Lifetime movie network shit for real that you just laid out there. Well, I will say one thing about Tulsi Gabbard. She's been mighty fucking quiet the past 24 plus hours. Alejandro is fully vaccinated. That is at XELASC4 asks, pineapple on pizza, yay or nay? Maybe they've got like some Canadian bacon and some ham and whatnot or something on there. Otherwise, I'm a staunch no on this. Like, the pineapple has to be on a particular type of pizza where pineapple is one of the one of a number of ingredients that makes it palatable. Otherwise, like, I don't want some fucking sweet shit on my pizza, thanks. Rob, that is at 6T1N Good, asks, or rather states that crickets from Macedonia. Yes, sir, you're absolutely correct. It is all quiet on the MAGA front. They are probably in shambles right now. Coping hard. Sapient human person, that is at Flutter Be Free, like the letter B and then free, asks, what food do you love to eat the most? Food. I love food. I eat it all the time. Food is my favorite food. If you can't tell, I'm like a fat kid on the inside. Yes, I like to eat. Yeah. And if I could be inappropriate, the second most favorite thing I like to eat is a woman. Anyway, kitten in disguise, that is at Totes Not a Spy, asks, how do you feel knowing people who called out Garland as a coward and advocating responsibility since January 2022 were proven right? Well, I don't actually believe you were proven right. I believe if you look at the totality of the circumstances, what you had is a number of Trump holdovers in office after 2021, but before Garland was appointed, did their best to spend the entirety of their time focusing their resources and efforts on the individuals on the ground at the Capitol on 1/6. And when Garland took over, the first thing he does is he gets his briefings from his underlings, quote unquote, and if they don't show him any evidence of Trump's particular involvement at the time, but they do show him tons of evidence of a number of individuals on the ground and their endeavors and the planning that they were involved in. Obviously, Garland is going to make that a priority first and decided to choose the route of working his way up the top, even though you can clearly see that DOJ was taking steps to investigate individuals higher up the chain involved in planning to overturn the 2020 election, whether that be Jeffrey Clark or John Eastman and whatnot, opening investigations into them that would eventually end up leading directly to the fake electors plot for multiple avenues. Also, Lisa Monaco, his deputy, didn't get confirmed until late 2021. And if you'll notice, around the time that she was confirmed and then she had, her principles in place, once that happened, once DOJ was staffed, Garland was in office, his deputy confirmed, and she had her people in place, investigations took off in every avenue, from the fake elector plot, the individuals involved in organizing January 6th, even the classified documents case. And at every seeming opportunity where DOJ would pursue higher ups in a number of areas related to Republican officials, it would be the FBI that was at odds with the DOJ and not the other way around, as in Wray and, Trump's former appointees, those people. They would be the ones regularly at odds with DOJ taking more serious investigative steps. And that's not to say necessarily that every incident of this was in bad faith. I mean, again, you got to think Trump spent every single day in office attacking the FBI, delegitimizing the organization, making it difficult for investigators to do their job, especially when it pertains to Republican officials. And of course, there's always the threat that if another Republican were to win in 2024, the individuals involved in these particular investigations would face scrutiny, if not retaliation, right? I mean, we already have, Bill Barr appointing John Durham as a special counsel to basically investigate the FBI, right? Imagine you're an FBI agent, you just show up to work, you're doing your job every day, and then your reward for that is you're under criminal and fucking investigation. Like, even if you've done nothing wrong, the shit is still fucking harrowing, right? So, imagine that times 10 should Trump, possibly win re-election, or DeSantis or someone. Republicans in the House, they already set up their committee to go after investigators. Of course, they're incompetent. It's a complete sham fraud of a committee and an investigation. But the shit's still fucking frustrating to have to deal with if you're just a lowly FBI agent. Like, no one wants that fucking smoke. So you got to take that account. Of course, these dudes should be doing their jobs without fear or favor, investigating the facts and following the evidence wherever it may lead, and whatever the fuck spiel it is that they feed us every day. But that is legitimately how it should be. And the individuals involved in pursuing those investigations to their fullest have all been appointed by Merrick fucking Garland. So Garland ain't really the problem here. Obviously, I would prefer if Garland had just immediately taken some further investigative steps the second he was appointed, but I do see the conflicting nature of wanting your predecessor to be investigated immediately upon leaving office, while also spending 4 years under Trump demanding that the Department of Justice be left to be independent, to not be used as a tool to go after political adversaries, right? You can kind of see the nature of the conflict. Obviously, it's different here because Trump is clearly guilty of some major fucking crimes, but you see the conflict and you see the steps that Merrick Garland went through to try and make the investigation appear as unbiased as possible. It's a tough fucking job. I don't agree with everything he's done or even the way that he went about things, but I do admit that apart from the delay in getting the major figures in the spotlight, the dude's been fucking effective. It's been fucking effective. And not only that, he took care of most of the classified documents investigation to begin with. Jack Smith wasn't appointed until late November, after Trump announced that he was running for president in 2024. So most of the legwork was already done, and that was Garland and Garland's people, and that is what led to the inevitable indictment of Trump in the Espionage Act violations. So if you want to blame Garland for the less than ideal route that he took to get here, you also have to credit Garland with the results, right? You could say, well, but Jack Smith's the one who indicted Trump. Well, who appointed Jack Smith? Who supplied Jack Smith with a large majority of the fucking evidence that he used in the prosecution? That was all Garland and his people. I know, I wish things were more clear-cut than that, and it was easy to just pick a fucking side and you could just trash Garland and be like, it's not that simple, sadly. Alright, no funds in this account. That is at Chris K0909. This isn't related to Russia, Putin, or Trump, but you did say to ask you anything. My kids and I are trying a 24-hour pizza dough recipe. We made it last night, but haven't seen a lot of change since then. It's been about 18 hours. Should we be patient or plan to order? You should plan to fucking order out. Was this supposed to be like the self-rising crust kind, or did you like have to add the yeast and shit yourself? Because if that's the case, and you forgot that step, or it's the self-rising kind and the self-rising is, well, it's in need of a blue pill, you might as well go ahead and hit that Postmates button, homie. Not that Postmates is a sponsor. Use whatever food delivery service that you prefer. I don't give a shit. But yeah, should make all the plans. Alright, Metro Crooning, that is at J Drunk Uncle, says that he is seeing some stuff saying Prigozhin has announced that they've turned around to their bases to avoid bloodshed, but we'll see though. That was as of 9 minutes ago. I've currently been doing this podcast for close to 45 minutes. I have no fucking idea on any recent updates in the fucking Russia coup saga. I have no idea. That's entirely possible. I seriously doubt that Prigozhin was making his way into Moscow and then was like, you know what? In the best interest of safety and to avoid potential bloodshed, yeah, we're gonna take this whole thing backwards and hit the rewind button. I seriously doubt that's the case. If something of that sort of nature did happen, I'm sure there is an underlying explanation that would make this apparent temporary retreat seem very prudent. Maybe he had some form of information made available to him that made it clear that marching on the Kremlin might not be the most ideal way of reaching his ultimate goal of removing Putin from power. So I don't know. No idea. You just have to stay tuned to the news for that one. But I will try to run down that lead as soon as I finish with the podcast and see what the fuck is going on. There's no telling at this point. Anyway, I think that does it for the questions at this point. Hopefully I'll get the girls back soon. We'll get the band back together for the next episode. And should we not, I will likely do another Ask Me Anything on the Twitter next time, along with any other important developing news that may occur over the course of the week. So tune in for that if that's something you're looking forward to. As for my closing thoughts, obviously the most pertinent issue we're facing right now, again, if we haven't covered it enough, is what's going on in Russia and its potential fallout as it pertains to the way United States politics plays out in the public sphere. And if not the 2024 election, it's always a good day when the bad guys are fighting amongst themselves. And today in Russia, the bad guys are fighting amongst themselves. I think depending on how this goes, we could see a number of parallels here in the United States that will also have the bad guys here fighting amongst themselves. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Hobart referring to each other as little bitches on the House floor is probably a good parallel for what Republicans will have to look forward to over the course of the next year, heading towards the 2024 election. A lot of metaphorical Republicans trying to hang Mike Pence yet again. Probably a lot of catfighting and infighting between potential running mates for Trump should he win the nomination. I'm sure the GOP primary is going to go fantastically swell. Probably won't be any fucking crazy surprises there, right? Especially with the way things are going in Russia. Who knows? Maybe without the backing from the Russian disinformation operation, this whole RFK Jr. / no labels plot will fall apart. It's entirely possible. Who knows where the funding from that shit is fucking coming from. Indictments are coming in the fake elector plot from 2020. It's unknown the number of individuals that will ensnare. But we do know a number of House Republicans and a couple of Republican senators were involved in cooking up that fucking plot. So shit, Republicans could end up losing the fucking House before we even get to 2024. Who knows? What I would say is do your best to mimic their tactics, the way they're trying to use Manchin and Sinema and RFK Jr. to sow division and chaos in the Democratic Party. Take those tactics, turn them around, and use them to sow chaos in the Republican Party and have them fighting amongst themselves the same way Putin and his goons are fighting amongst themselves in Russia. And that concludes this episode of Part of the Insurrection.